Stuka Joe here. I recently made a video demonstrating a card-driven game solo method using Paths of Glory. The method uses a card display which is now available at the File section of Paths of Glory's page at BGG, and it also includes instructions. The purpose of this podcast-style video is to explain the reasoning, if any, of this method. Your views, comments, and suggestions are always welcome since this is a work in progress. So here we go. If you like war games with cards, then you probably enjoy card-driven war games or CDGs. CDGs are games where the actions of the combat units are driven by the play of cards. They are very popular these days, and it's not hard to see why. CDGs provide a great amount of suspense and surprises because each player is unaware of the other player's cards and therefore of the enemy's intentions and capabilities. CDGs also condense a significant amount of information in the cards, saving players from otherwise having to memorize additional pages of rules. In addition, because of the nature of the CDG mechanic, where each player draws cards to form his or her hand, replayability tends to be high since players will always draw different cards at different times during each game. It should be no surprise then that the highest rated game in Board Game Geek is Twilight Struggle. There's a never-ending debate as to whether Twilight Struggle qualifies as a wargame or not, but there is no doubt that it is a CDG. So, if you've played CDGs, chances are that you have witnessed their unique qualities and mechanics, and you have enjoyed the experience that the system has to offer. That is, of course, if you've played CDGs as they were intended to be played, opposed by a real person. Or on the other hand, if you've played a CDG solo, you might have found that the experience is far from exciting, challenging, or fulfilling. To better describe the solo CDG experience, the word flat comes to mind. Why is this so? Well, it's pretty obvious. When you play a CDG solo, you have knowledge of all of the cards on both sides' hands, something that effectively defeats the most self-evident characteristic of the CDG design. So when making decisions for one side, you know exactly how the other side can and should respond. And this makes for an unrewarding gaming experience as you play each side pretending that you don't know what the other side can do, practically trying to fool yourself. Recently, there's been developments in the design of solitaire systems for CDGs. These are mostly in the form of flowcharts referred to as bots, which establish play priorities for non-player factions, such as the ones found in GMT's Churchill and the most recent edition of Empire of the Sun, also from GMT. But as to the rest of the CDGs, the only option you have is to put on the dunce cap. George Carlin once said, "Why is easy listening music so hard to listen to? Why are CDGs so hard to play solo? When you play a CDG face-to-face, you have lots of decisions to make. Which of the 6 or 7 cards in my hand do I play, and for which of the 4 purposes do I play them? But you actually make half of the card play decisions during the game. Your opponent makes the other half. When you play a CDG solo, you have double the number of decisions to make, and this may just be too much. People find that the constant decision-making process while playing solo is mentally exhausting, and there's no surprises. So, is there a better way of playing CDG solo than the current state of affairs? Is there a way to play CDGs solitaire where the player is challenged by unexpected situations, surprised by unforeseen events, while unaware of all of the other side's capabilities? And that is what this CDG solo method is all about. This method is not an artificial intelligence mechanism for the side that you are playing against. In this method, or way of playing CDGs, you will be playing both sides to the best of your ability within the circumstances provided to you by each game situation. Let's take a look first at what do CDGs bring to the table in terms of game mechanics and overall enjoyment. so that the solo method retains as much of the CDG's essence as possible. We will also look at various aspects of CDGs that have been criticized to see if this new CDG solo method can improve gameplay in these particular areas. First, what are the characteristics of your typical CDG wargame? Well, the most evident one is the element of uncertainty present in the CDG design as to each side's options, and therefore capabilities. It follows then that if we are to develop a method of playing CDG solo, we must ensure that it includes an element of uncertainty with respect to the play of cards by both sides. To facilitate explaining this Solo CDG method, I will constantly refer here to one of the most popular CDG wargames ever published. If you like CDGs, you probably have this game already. Paths of Glory from GMT, now in its 5th printing. In many CDGs such as Paths of Glory, there is a separate deck of strategy cards for each side, with events specific to each side in their respective decks. In other CDGs, such as for instance For the People, also from GMT, there's a common deck of strategy cards from which players form their respective hands, and the cards contain color-coded events that may be played by one or both sides. This solo method should work well with games that have separate decks of strategy cards as well as those with a common deck of strategy cards. Another characteristic of most CDGs is that strategy cards can be played for more than one purpose. In Paths of Glory, cards can be played for operation points, to trigger an event, to receive replacement points, or to conduct strategic redeployment. In most CDGs, each side has a defined hand size, that is, a specific number of cards that the side can hold in its hand during a turn. In Paths of Glory, each player has a 7-card hand. In this solo method, however, each player will have a 5-card hand. In CDGs, it is typical that as cards are played during each action round, the number of cards in the player's hand is reduced. So if a player plays a card in the first round, he will have 6 cards left. If he plays another card in the second round, he will have 5 left, and so forth. And if a player plays a card in each action round, at the end of the 6th and last action round in Paths of Glory, he will have 1 card left, unless he played the card for its event as a combat card during the other side's action round, in which case he will have no cards left. In this CDG solo method, each side will always have 5 cards to choose from in each of the side's action rounds. It is also customary in CDGs that players have complete knowledge of the cards in their hand while having no knowledge whatsoever of the cards in the enemy's hand. This is perfectly fine in a 2-player face-to-face game. But in a solo setting, having knowledge of the identity of the cards in each side's hands effectively defeats the main feature of the CDG design. In the proposed CDG method, the solo player, whenever conducting an action round for one side, will have knowledge of all the cards in that side's hand, and in most instances, 3 of the 5 cards of the inactive side's hand. In CDGs, when a player selects a card to be played for a specific purpose, that is for its ops, event, replacement points, or strategic redeployment, the card is played for that purpose. Thus, whatever card the player chooses to be played will be played for the desired purpose all of the time. In other words, there's no possibility for any selected card not to be played as a result of changing circumstances, command confusion, bureaucratic blunders, mishaps, and other unexpected situations typical in armed conflicts. This is one of those aspects of CDGs that has been criticized. Some people feel that players in CDGs have too much control over certain matters in the game. After all, who do the players represent in a CDG game? In Paths of Glory, for instance, the players do not represent a single person, as for instance in For the People, where each player represents either President Lincoln or President Jefferson Davis. In Paths of Glory, each player represents a coalition of nations with diverse political leaders and military commanders that span the gamut of abilities and agendas, all fighting on the same side, but sometimes with conflicting goals. Under these circumstances, having too much control of a side's options may seem somewhat over-optimistic. Consequently, adding an element of uncertainty to card selection of the active side seems just about right. In the proposed CDG method, the solo player nominates a card to be played. The method uses a card display. The display in its top half has a space for a draw pile and another space for the discard pile. In the bottom half, there's a track composed of 5 spaces from left to right: A, B, C, D, and E. Each card in these spaces has a specific success die roll range. The method uses 2 differently colored dice, one white die and one black die or of any other color. The player, after nominating a card in a specific space, rolls both dice and checks the white die result against the nominated card's success range. Spaces A and E have a success range of 1 to 3. Spaces B and D, a success range of 1 to 4. And the card in the middle space, space C, has a success range of 1 to 5. Thus, the CDG solo method introduces uncertainty and randomness to the selection of the cards that are played by the active side. Also, as things currently stand in full disclosure CDG solo play, all strategy cards have the same chance of being played at all times. In other words, a particular strategy card may be played in the first round of the action phase with absolute certainty, while the same card may be withheld only to be played in the 6th round with the same degree of certainty. The dynamic nature of war, with changing priorities, opportunities, and circumstances, does not affect at all a card's availability or chance of being played. Now, in the card display, what do spaces A through E represent? Well, the obvious answer is that they are spaces to hold strategy cards. So let's first answer the question, what do strategy cards represent? Strategy cards, which can be played for one of various purposes, represent distinct courses of action. Typical in CDGs is the characteristic that higher ops valued cards in a game also have higher numbers of replacement and strategic redeployment points, as well as very significant events associated to the card when compared to lower ops value card. This correlation is necessary in all CDGs, otherwise the decision as to for what specific purpose the card should be played would become obvious, and players would play each card for the same purpose all the time. Therefore, each strategy card represents the opportunity to engage in a specific course of action, some very important ones, like the ones found in Ops 5s and Ops 4 cards in Paths of Glory, or other courses of action which are not as dramatic, such as the ones found in Ops 2 cards. So, if the cards represent courses of action, what do spaces A through E on the card display represent? In short, each space represents a degree of military awareness, preparedness, and opportunity. Let's take a look at each of the spaces on the track. A card in the leftmost space, space A, with a success die roll range of 1 to 3, represents a course of action that the side has just become aware may exist, but that there is not enough information about it to render it a reliable option. A card in space B with a success die roll range of 1 to 4 represents a course of action that has been considered and for which there is a significant amount of information about, and which seems a realistic one, but for which there are still doubts as to whether it can be implemented successfully. A card in space C with a success die roll range of 1 to 5 represents the course of action that the side has been most prepared for, the one with the most information gathered at the time, and the one with the best chance of implementation. A card in space D with a die roll range of 1 to 4 represents a course of action that has been contemplated for some time and studied, but not acted upon, and at this time may not be as suitable to the situation at hand as it was before. And finally, the card in the rightmost space of the track, space E, with a success die roll range of 1 to 3, represents a course of action that once appeared certain and realistic, but has been overlooked, neglected, or simply relegated to secondary importance, and at this time there are serious doubts as to whether it can be realized. In the CDG Solo method, after a card is played, all remaining cards on the display's track, that is spaces A through E, are moved to the right along the track. Any card in the rightmost space, space E, goes to the discard pile without having been played. Any cards in spaces A through D are moved to the right of the track so that each card occupies a space from right to left of the track. Then any remaining empty spaces, usually spaces A and B, are filled with a card taken from the draw pile placed face down. What does this card movement to the right of the track in each round represent? This movement represents the realities of opportunity, timing, and changes of circumstance, as well as the cost of deciding on a specific course of action where a different course of action is often sacrificed. And now to the issue of events in CDGs. CDGs have been repeatedly criticized for giving players godlike powers and allowing them to trigger specific events at their whim. Some events relate to weather conditions, supply problems, historical battles, as well as the effects of weapons and historical characters. In the good old days, hex and counter games had none or very little in terms of events affecting play. Later on, many games incorporated a random events table, where events would be implemented once per turn, if any, randomly, of course. But in your typical CDG, there is no provision for random events. CDGs allow players to completely control the onset of these events simply by playing the corresponding card. So it is somewhat ironic that CDGs, which include one event in each card, do not allow for such events to be triggered randomly, that is, beyond the control of the players. In this CDG Solo method, the player will still be able to trigger events whenever he plays successfully a nominated card for a specific purpose and he chooses the event. However, in this method, there will be significant probabilities for the game to be interrupted by a random event. Whenever doubles are rolled, a card will be played solely for its event. There are only two exceptions to this, and this is when the card drawn is a combat event card, that is, a card whose event can only be played during the course of a battle resolution, and the other exception is when the requirements for playing the event have not been met. In any of these two instances, the solo player can play the card for whatever other purpose he wants. In this solo method, if in rolling for a nominated card, the solo player rolls a double 1, double 2, double 3, double 4, or double 5, then the card in space A, B, C, D, or E, respectively, will be played solely for its event. Again, if the selected card is a combat event card, or if the event's requirements have not been met, then the card can be played for any other purpose. Now, if the doubles rolled are double 6, then we have an unexpected event. Draw the top card from the draw pile and implement its event, unless, of course, it's a combat event card or the event's requirements have not been met. Finally, in the present form of playing CDGs solo, the player knows the exact composition of each side's hands at all times, and this knowledge, of course, does away with the CDG's main design feature, the uncertainty generated by not knowing the opponent's cards. CDGs create a fog of war, not as to the composition of enemy forces, but as to the enemy's capabilities, which is non-existent in full disclosure solo play. So, this solo method should keep the player unaware of a substantial number of cards of the side which he is not currently playing in order to maintain certain unpredictability, tension, and surprise, which is inherent in CDGs. In this CDG solo method, after sliding all the cards to the right of the display, the player draws as many cards as necessary to fill the empty spaces on the track and places the newly drawn cards, one in each space, leaving them face down. These cards will remain face down until that side's next action round, or until the other side declares at least one attack, in which case the face-down cards will be flipped to see if there are any eligible combat event cards that may aid the defenders. These are the characteristics of CDG play and some of the issues relating to playing CDG solo, which this CDG solo method attempts to address. It is important to stress that the goal of this method is not to become a substitute for the two-player game. It is only intended as a method of playing CDG's solitaire in a more engaging way than playing the game with full disclosure of the cards on both sides. Well, this is the reasoning, if any, behind this method. I have tested the method, but not extensively, and for that, I rely on the input of anyone who may be interested in experimenting with the method. I really enjoy CDGs. This is a genre that is widely accepted and is here to stay. My goal is only to improve the CDG solo experience. After all, most CDGs do not have solitaire provisions. And in that endeavor, I certainly welcome your comments, suggestions, and views. This is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for listening.